Good evening, dear all. We welcome you to this special edition of the Drug Information Training for Pharmacists. Especially, we welcome our guest speakers, Dr. Ashish Advani from faraway Atlanta, Georgia, and the pharmacist Ayobami Diolu from Lagos, Nigeria. To start the meeting, we would like to start with a silent prayer individually by all of us. Can we observe a silent individual prayer in 1 minute, please? The agenda is shared and it is as follows. We have done the opening prayer, and the lecture one will be by Dr. Ashish Advani, and that will take 20 minutes. The second lecture will be by pharmacist Ayobami Diolu. That will take another 20 minutes. Then we'll have a question and answers and comments. That will take another 25 minutes. Then we'll have closing. And to start the first lecture, I want to call on Dr. Teresa Pand to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Advani. Dr. Pand, can you please go ahead and introduce our speaker for the first lecture, sir?
Yeah. Good evening. It's really, can everybody hear me? I've unmuted myself.
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me the honor to introduce Dr. Ashish Advani, who I've known for over 10 years. I don't think there's anybody more befitting to give this presentation than Dr. Advani. So it's really an honor to introduce him. Just briefly, Dr. Advani, when I met him, he was a clinical pharmacy specialist at the Mercer School of Pharmacy and also a professor at that school for over 10 years. And with all the knowledge he acquired and his interest in technology, he moved on to find this company called InpharmD. So he's currently the CEO and obviously the founder of InpharmD. I think we're going to learn a lot from him, and hopefully the information he's going to share with us is going to be able to be applied to Nigeria. Currently, I'm with Wellstar Atlanta Medical Center here in Georgia, and they have like over 11 hospitals. Shortly after he founded this InpharmD, I'm happy to say that almost all the hospitals within that healthcare system are using this, technology. And he will also share with you guys how he has expanded this all over to some of the hospitals. So again, my pleasure to welcome and introduce Dr. Ashish Advani to give us the presentation on what he's doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pans. So you have the floor, Dr. Ashish Advani.
Thank you, Dr. Bello and Dr. Pounds. And now I see over 35 participants here on the call. So thank you to each and every one of you guys. I understand it's evening in your time, 9 p.m., I believe, in Nigeria. And it's certainly a sign of your dedication. And for my part, I'm incredibly grateful. Before I continue, I just want to say a big thanks to Dr. Bello and Dr. Pounds for inviting me. It's part of our goal to be able to do what we do, but for the whole world. And Dr. Pounds actually invited me to Nigeria about 5 years ago. I went to Benin City and we went to Delta State as well. And so I have such fond memories of Nigeria. I always consider myself Indian and American and also Nigerian as well. And so it's good to be amongst my brothers and sisters again. And again, I appreciate you guys inviting me. What I'm gonna do is pull up a PowerPoint really quickly that shows you what we do. And I'll end with this as well. So you're all drug information specialists. And so you can appreciate, like, we just want to answer people's questions, right? But what we did is we built an app where we can take people's questions and then we are on the other side of it answering people's questions. So you can see it how you see it right there. You see me on the other side of it, but in fairness, I'm not actually answering as many questions anymore. You know, we've been growing quite a bit, and now I'm just really looking after this growing company. But towards the end, I can show you how you guys can sign up, and to be able to tell you folks about a lot of the literature that you see. First thing that I want to do is tell you a little bit about what the FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and I want to explain their role. And then before I go on, I want to tell you, afterwards, I want to one drug in particular, recent drug approval called remdesivir. And this drug has a lot of interesting literature around it. And so I think by reviewing drug literature, you guys can understand a lot of my perspective, and hopefully I can share that with you in 20 minutes. So the first 10 minutes, I just want to tell you about the FDA and its role, because I think worldwide it assumes that FDA is all knowing. Maybe you do, I don't know, but maybe you don't. But the US Food and Drug Administration is basically there to ensure the safety and effectiveness of our drugs. And if you look at the people at the left, generally politically, they feel like the FDA should not do anything at all. There should be no money in the FDA, and it should just let in any drug that really basically applies, and they can be able to get in. And so that's what some people want. Now, the next the thing I want to show you is what the current FDA does. This is what the FDA, where they are currently at. And they will allow drugs and devices to market if they improve some surrogate endpoints. Now, I've seen some of your talks in the past. You guys, I'm pretty sure, have a good understanding of what surrogate endpoints are. But if you'll forgive me, just because some people may not here on this call, there's a growing number I see of participants. So I want to stop and tell you what I mean by surrogate endpoints. These are endpoints that we as clinicians don't really care that much about. So these are things like, you know, did it raise blood pressure by 2 millimeters mercury? And, you know, that's nice, but does it really mean going to reduce length of stay? Does it mean that you're going to reduce hospitalization? Does it mean you're going to keep people out of the ICU? Does it mean that you're going to prevent morbidity or mortality? Those are things that we as clinicians care about, right? So what I mean by surrogate endpoints, these endpoints that aren't that, but they are clinical trialists to be able to measure. The FDA let that they allow that. So they allow someone to measure a 2 millimeter of mercury as endpoint versus what I think we all really care about, which is like morbidity or length of stay or hospitalizations, and that this benefits the clinical trial makers. And so what I'm trying to tell you is the bar to have an approved product is very low. It's very easy approved in the United States because they don't make it that hard. Hopefully that makes sense. They make it very easy as long as they can manage and meet these surrogate endpoints, then they can get the drug approved. I think someone came off mute, but I think we're good now. So the other part I want to tell you is about safety. The current FDA basically allows any drug to be approved as long as it's not catastrophically dangerous. So as long as a drug doesn't kill a lot of people, generally it's going to be approved, right? And so basically it's a free market. You know, if a drug does end up doing bad, then only the FDA will pull it off of the market. But basically they're saying in the clinical trials, as long as they show that it didn't kill a lot of people, then hey, we'll let it be approved. And so the FDA, what I'm trying to tell you is not making it that hard for new drugs to come out to market. And this is why what we do in drug information is so important. Now, what the FDA should be doing is being able to enforce basic safety and effectiveness before a drug comes to the market in the United States. and I've been to Nigeria. As I mentioned, I know that a lot of times, someone tried to sell me a route on the street, and they said, "Oh, you know what? Don't worry about the FDA. This route will will cure whatever you want." And so I know I understand your perspective. Like you're really looking at the FDA, thinking like, "Hey." I, hope I've explained to you already is that the FDA is not exactly doing what you think it is. This is what you think it's doing, and it's not quite doing that. And that is enforcing these very rigorous safety and effectiveness standards. They also have these things called post-marketing studies that drugs are supposed to have, and they have not done that. They have not really drugs to that standard. And so the FDA maybe is falling short of the way that most people in Nigeria or anywhere else in the world might think that it should be doing. And then the last thing is like, how far could a government regulatory body go? They could be doing a whole lot more. The government could actually be doing the trials for all the drugs that come out, instead of the pharmaceutical companies. But obviously, like we're a far way away from such a strong government authority here. And this is not a political statement. I'm only really telling you this to tell you that it's so important to be able to appraise the literature. And so the only the only like case example that I have time to go over with you is one on COVID. Dr. Pounds, we went through all of the recent ones yesterday, but and I'd be happy to come back or send you guys a recording if you want to see all the other ones. But I picked the one for COVID for you guys because I thought everyone knows COVID. Everyone's eyes, the whole world's eyes are around what is going on in COVID. And I know that Nigeria, you've got your own, you're probably obviously not looking at the United States all the time or even a little bit of the time, but I'm sure you're aware that we just approved remdesivir for the treatment of COVID. And so I just want to give you some perspective for remdesivir. I really just want to walk you through, everybody probably knows the pharmacology and the kinetics, or you can look that up on Google very easily. But I will tell you that this was a failed Ebola drug. This was actually made to try to target the Ebola crisis that we saw 10 years back at least, and it didn't work. And so now I've always been skeptical, and maybe this is natural for every drug information pharmacist, is to be skeptical and say, like, how is it that a drug that didn't work for Ebola will now work for COVID? What are the chances of that? It's very small. So I'm naturally skeptical, and then I'm especially skeptical about this one. But I want to walk you through the studies so you understand, because if we as drug information pharmacists don't lead here, then where else will we lead? Most doctors here in the United States don't really have an understanding of the literature that well. And so it's important for us as pharmacists to really understand this literature, because this is an opportunity for us as pharmacists to really, doctors can't know everything. And so it's a really big opportunity. It's a really important opportunity for pharmacists to own this space if we can understand the literature. And so, so I've been trying to help people understand it's really not that difficult. There's really 3 studies that we should be aware of with remdesivir. And it's a good story. In fact, if you guys like stories, I'll tell it in 3 parts. The first part, study 1, I'll zoom in here, is a placebo-controlled study. We always would like to see active controlled studies, like go up against a drug that already works. But if you're going to go up against placebo, it's really hard to tell, all that much. But what we can tell is that it reduced length of stay, which was good. It's an endpoint that we care about. It's not one of those like, those surrogate markers that I was telling you before. Length of stay, we care about. And so the big take home from this first study was that, hey, we wish that we had better comparator than placebo, but what we can tell is that if you give it to people in the hospital, you can generally assume it's going to reduce their length of stay versus if you had not given it before. And so that's how this became part of every hospital's protocol here in the United States. And I'm assuming there in Nigeria as well, is the reason why people get it is because of this. They figure, hey, if they're in the hospital, they might as well give it. And you see there, there's safety to the right. You know, there's nothing huge there that would make someone feel like, oh, I shouldn't give it. You know, whenever we evaluate a trial, we're trying to compare efficacy, but then we're also like comparing efficacy to safety as well. You know, we have to be able to think about the tolerability. Efficacy was good for the type of trial that this was, and then and the safety didn't really pose any issues. Now, the second study right underneath, this was where the kind of the shine of remdesivir started to wear off. You know, if you meet someone and they're perfect, you know, their teeth are perfect, they're smiling, they're, you know, everything is perfect. And then eventually you say, hey, this person is too perfect. Something has to be wrong. And eventually you start to see, okay, that's not, you start to see the shine wear off, right? And so that was study number 2. The remdesivir showed that there was some benefit in a 5-day group versus standard of care, but not a 10-day group. Now, what was big about this study is this was not against placebo, which is nice. Again, whenever we see a study, we would like a drug to go up against standard of care versus placebo. But in this case, this kind of backfired because when it went up against standard of care, they realized that this actually wasn't that helpful. Can give it for 5 days and help someone, but if you give it for 10, it's not helpful. A hard question to be able to answer. You know, you would think that the longer you give a drug, it should be helpful that way. So study 2 really was sort of like and a little bit negative too, right? And then number 3 was similar, is that there was really no difference in recovery rates or mortality rates. And so we start to see like, hey, remdesivir, and there's 5 total, by the way, that are happening. And so this is 3 of 5. But what I want to show you now is the World Health Organization. And this is why I told you it's good if pharma doesn't do a study and independent. And so the World Health Organization actually did their own study, regardless of the 5 that are being done by the drug company, 3 of which I've just showed you. And the World Health Organization said, we're going to take 30,000 patients that have already gotten remdesivir. And they looked and they basically saw there is no difference in the whole world, 30 countries, 30,000 patients. And I can zoom in as far as I can, and you will not be able to see a difference between remdesivir and the control group. It is, you could almost superimpose those 2 images over each other, and you can't tell any difference between giving this drug and giving someone a control or a placebo or a sugar pill. And so this was particularly harmful for remdesivir. I mean, how can they say that this is an effective drug when the largest study, 30,000 patients, is basically showing it's the same as placebo? In the same study, sorry about that. In the same study, they also found that there was no difference in mortality or the percent of patients that need to go to ventilation, which is like a sign, you know, that they're doing very, very bad. And so, you know, I don't know where you guys are starting from, but I just want to tell you that if you're hearing that remdesivir is this incredibly effective drug, well, hey, it may be in some patients, but I also want to give you the entire picture. Is that if you zoom out and you look at worldwide, and you look at that study that I just presented, remdesivir actually ends up being really not that effective as an intervention. And so again, it's our job as drug information pharmacists to really know these 3 studies and then the World Health Organization one, That one obviously is probably the biggest one we should rely on, because it's the biggest in terms of patients. And so so that would be how I would go about it. And I hope that me going through it maybe helps you in all of the other drugs that you guys would evaluate. We also would go through dosage and costs. And when we look at the formulary, for just for your information, we would look at all of these criteria: pharmacologic class, effectiveness, safety, pharmacokinetic advantage if it offers one, and then is it cost effective. And in this case, hopefully in some, I can tell you and it'll make sense, is this is a new class for COVID and it is safe. But do those two things make it worthy of putting on a formulary? Some different P&T committees will have to decide. And again, I think this nuance is really where we as drug information pharmacists can lead. Okay, I think I've taken about 20 minutes. I hope I didn't take up too much more. But I do want to tell you that we have a website that you guys can go ahead and try, and you can try that for free. You can submit your own drug information requests 24/7, 365. We will put together all of the studies that exist, just like I just went through there. And then we'll even give you our critique at the bottom, kind of like I went through just now. So thank you guys very much. I am grateful for the opportunity again to present to you.